37. 26 knots down the Eagle. 106 interval is a Rhino at 5. Sure, sir. 207 on flat path on course 1 mile. Sure, sir. 207 on flat path on course.
In mid-October 2001, just after the start of the US-led invasion of Afghanistan, British troops from A&G Squadrons, the 22nd S.A.S. Regiment, arrived in theatre under the codename of Operation Determine. Initially expecting their mission to be focused on high-intensity operations against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, the S.A.S. instead found themselves conducting unopposed long-range reconnaissance patrols in the northwest of the country, and eventually as the tempo of these patrols decreased, the two squadrons were withdrawn to their garrison in Britain on the 8th of November 2001. However, following the intervention of British Prime Minister Tony Blair to grant the S.A.S. a greater role in the war in Afghanistan, A&G squadrons were warned that they would be heading back to the country a week later. On their return on the 17th of November, the troops received the first indication of their expanded role, when a briefing came through from the Ministry of Defence detailing an Al-Qaeda target in the southwest of Afghanistan. The target in question was a large 5-building factory, which had been identified by US and British intelligence as being a storage facility for opium, that was guarded by up to 100 Al-Qaeda fighters who had turned the area into a mini-fortress with an array of entrenched positions in the vicinity of the factory. In the context of the broader mission in hunting down Osama Bin Laden, the Americans designated it a low-priority objective, as it was assessed that there were no high-value targets on the site. The British, on the other hand, believed the factory may contain a substantial amount of intelligence, and were able to convince their US counterparts to get troops on the ground to seize the area. Those troops were to be the men of A&G Squadrons, the 22nd S.A.S. Regiment, who were tasked with assaulting and seizing the factory under the codename of Operation Trent. The plan for Operation Trent was threefold, with Phase 1 beginning with the drop of an 8-man team from G Squadron onto a patch of desert 150 km away from the target. This team was to conduct a halo jump for an American C-130 Hercules transport aircraft and mark out a temporary landing zone, onto which the remainder of A&G Squadrons, a total of 120 operators, were to be inserted onto by a further 6 C-130s. This airlift was to be carried out in 2 waves. Once both squadrons had formed up on the TLZ, they were then to drive the 150 km to the target, using 38 Land Rover 110 HCPUs, 8 Kawasaki dirt bikes, and 2 logistic vehicles carrying all the supplies for the ground force. On their arrival at the objective, Phase 2 was to begin, with 4 US FA-18 Hornets and 2 F-14 Tomcats conducting a preliminary bombing run on the target, which would act as the signal for A Squadron to begin the main assault aimed at securing the factory itself, whilst G Squadron provided fire support from a distance. Once the factory was secured, the third and final phase would commence, with A Squadron collecting any valuable intelligence from the site before linking back up with G Squadron and extracting themselves from the region. Unfortunately, Phases 2 and 3 were to be conducted in broad daylight, as the United States Central Command made it clear that the 6 US fighter aircraft could only be on station for a 1-hour period at 1100 on the day of the operation. This was far from ideal, but given the rarity of these type of missions and the possibility of the operation being cancelled altogether without air support, the S.A.S. reluctantly agreed to this timetable. By late November 2001, with the preparations complete, the 120 men of A&G Squadrons, the 22nd S.A.S. Regiment, were given the green light to execute Operation Trent, the largest mission to be carried out by the S.A.S. since the end of the Second World War. On an undisclosed date in late November 2001, the 8-man Halo team from G Squadron boarded their US C-130 Hercules transport aircraft and took off from Bagram Air Base for the temporary landing zone. Flying for 2 hours, the team made their jump into a remote area of southwest Afghanistan, conducting the first Halo insertion into enemy territory in the history of the S.A.S. On their landing, the team began testing the firmness of the ground to make sure it was capable of holding the weight of a C-130, before sending a signal to the rest of the task force stating that they had arrived safely and that the temporary landing zone was suitable to be used. Approximately 14 hours later, G Squadron arrived in the 6 C-130s, driving their vehicles off the ramps and out of the rear of the moving aircraft, prior to the Hercules taking to the skies again to collect A Squadron, who arrived in a similar fashion several hours later. By 01:30 on the morning of the undisclosed date in November, the ground force was assembled and driving 150 kilometers to the target, during which one of the Land Rovers suffered a breakdown and was forced to be left behind with its 3-man crew. Nonetheless, the remainder of the 2 squadrons pressed on and reached their rendezvous point in the mid-morning, from where they got eyes on the objective just below them. However, immediately on their arrival, the S.A.S became engaged by small arms and RPG fire materialising from the factory, as Al-Qaeda fighters who had observed sand being thrown into the air from the British vehicles in the distance were fully alerted to the impending assault. In response, the S.A.S brought their vehicle-mounted general-purpose machine guns into action, just as the 4 FA-18 Hornets and 2 F-14 Tomcats arrived overhead at 1100 and carried out their preliminary bombing run, destroying over £50 million worth of opium and the buildings they were stored in. As soon as the bombs detonated, the men of A Squadron started the engines of their Land Rovers and drove at full speed towards the factory, under the cover of G Squadron, who remained at a distance suppressing the enemy defences, using snipers, mortars, machine guns and anti-tank rocket launchers. Racing across the desert, A Squadron reached a point a couple of hundred metres away from the objective, dismounted from their vehicles and began advancing on foot, during which several Al-Qaeda bunker positions opened up on the British troopers and temporarily stalled the assault. Realising that A was pinned down, the senior S.A.S commander on the ground made the decision to move G Squadron forward several hundred metres to better engage the enemy, in addition to calling in strafing runs by the Hornets and Tomcats onto the bunker positions. These runs, which came in danger close to the S.A.S and marked the final action of the US air support, were successful in neutralising these strong points, enabling A Squadron to resume its assault. Moving up to the edge of the objective, the squadron dissolved into a dozen small teams, some of which began clearing out the enemy trenches, whilst others penetrated into the factory and began methodically securing the outbuildings, a process that saw a large number of the enemy be killed or captured, and 4 of the S.A.S operators become wounded in the firefights, although none of their wounds proved to be fatal, and all 4 were safely extracted from the area without further incident. Meanwhile, as soon as the outbuildings were cleared, half of A Squadron fought their way forward to the main compound, which had been identified by British intelligence as being the Al-Qaeda headquarters for the facility. With teams sealing off potential exit routes from the structure, a couple more moved forward and breached into the single-storey compound, where upon storming inside they found no enemy fighters, but instead large quantities of paperwork and electronic devices relating to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Once the building was declared clear of hostiles, the S.A.S began collecting every bit of intelligence they could, while small pockets of Al-Qaeda fighters still holding out throughout the area were dealt with by the rest of A Squadron. By 1500, with their mission complete and receiving the news of possible enemy reinforcements en route to the region, the troopers of A Squadron rallied on the fringes of the factory and returned to their Land Rovers, where alongside their colleagues in G Squadron they began to withdraw back to the temporary landing zone. Arriving here in the late evening, they were greeted by a US CH-47 Chinook helicopter, which evacuated the 4 wounded S.A.S operators to an American military base in Pakistan, whilst the rest of the task force re-embarked into C-130 Hercules transport aircraft and were transported back to Bagram Air Base for a mission debrief.